You're now watching the Mike Missanelli Podcast on the BetRivers Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Mike Missanelli Podcast. Start of another week in June, and the weather's going to get really hot this week. We are, of course, brought to you by BetRivers, and we have a special of special guests today. A man who was just inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the 2024 Pete Rozelle Radio-Television Award, and will be honored during the Hall of Fame enshrinement in early August in Canton, Ohio. He is, of course, the legendary voice of the Philadelphia Eagles for many, many years. Mr. Merrill Reese joins us. Hello, Merrill.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Doing well.
Brought me in to talk about the U.S. Open.
Yeah, well, we know what we might touch on that in a little bit because I know you're an avid golfer, as am I. But let's get to the important matters here. Going to the Hall of Fame is a lofty award, and you've got. First of all, what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Shock, absolutely shock. It was nothing that I ever thought about, and nothing that I ever thought attainable. And I was just driving out to play golf, and I got a call, and I look on my dashboard that says Canton, Ohio, and I figured I don't really know anybody in Canton, Ohio, and I picked it up. And it was the president of the Hall of Fame, and he said, "Congratulations." And all I could do was cry. And I don't usually react to things that way, but I was just overcome.
So how did you play golf? After hearing that news, you get to the golf course, are you on cloud nine? Are you able to hit it straight?
Here's the worst part. I was meeting my regular Wednesday foursome, and he told me before I left the conversation, "You can only tell your wife, because we're going to break it tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So please don't tell anybody, because we've got to keep it off social media." And so I couldn't say anything to my three friends, and I had a great round.
So once the three friends found out when it was announced nationally, did they break your stones a little bit for not revealing it?
Very congratulatory, I can tell you that. The funny thing, the next day when it came out, I have a charity tournament I'm involved in out in Doylestown or out in Downingtown that raises money for assistance dogs. And at that point, I had to keep my phone with me, and I'm taking phone calls and I'm hitting balls. I was a mess. I probably shot 200.
Well, listen, we couldn't be more happy for you and proud. You've represented this area for such a long period of time. Will you actually get to wear the gold blazer?
I don't know. I would doubt it. I'd probably get a bust of Pete Rozelle.
Okay, that's okay. But you'll be hobnobbing with all these great Hall of Fame players. And I guess you have to be looking forward to that, right?
I'm looking forward to the entire experience, and just the fact that my family will be out there, many of my friends will be out there. We'll make a nice weekend out of it, but it means everything.
Merrill, your career has been so distinguished that I really don't know where to go with this. But let's start at the beginning, because nobody's really more Philadelphia than you. Overbrook High and Temple University, right? Does it get more Philly than that?
No, I don't think so.
So I'm curious to know this whole. We all have our stories and how we started. Some of us went from one venue to the next. Some of us were really lucky that something fell in our laps. But where was the idea? Where did the idea come to you that you wanted to be a radio voice?
When I realized that I couldn't be the quarterback. I grew up playing everything, Mike. I mean, I loved sports from the very, very beginning. And actually, I had a mother who had kind of a show business flair. She was a kindergarten teacher, but she really loved things. And she took us around for dramatic lessons and all kinds of stuff. And by the time I was 7, I was doing a bunch of TV commercials, radio commercials, live TV commercials. So I did a lot of that till I was about 12. And then I forgot about that. But then my dream became, I go out to Franklin Field and I look up and see Bill Campbell. And I said, that's where I want to be one day. So that dream, in fact, in my high school yearbook, it says aspires to be a sportscaster. So
That's amazing. Now, let me ask you this: did you always have the golden dulcet tones,
no,
and that maybe influenced what you wanted to do and what people saw you as?
that didn't happen until after my freshman year of college. But I did major in communications at Temple. And by my sophomore year, I was sports director of WRTI, the student station. And I did I did football, baseball, basketball. We had a line, Mike, at the Palestra. So we didn't just do Temple. We did every Big Five game played throughout the entire season. And in fact, one Saturday afternoon, I plugged in and did the public league playoffs, 3 games in the afternoon, ran over to Pagano for pizza, and then came back and did a college doubleheader at night. I did 5 games.
That is pretty amazing. Now, did you start? You started at WBCB? Was that your first gig?
No, I started in Pottstown.
Okay, Pottstown.
I auditioned in Coatesville, and they told me that I couldn't start in the play. I couldn't start some play. I had to start someplace smaller. That was Coatesville. And then I went to Pottstown, and I heard they needed somebody to do a football game on a Saturday afternoon. And the station owner, a man named Herb Scott, interviewed me, and he said, "I'd give you a chance, but you'd look like you have a nervous breakdown." So I went home, and on Friday afternoon, he called me, and he said, "I can find absolutely nobody else to do this game. It's you or dead air." And I went up and I did a Pottsgrove Springford high school game, and then WPAZ hired me full-time the following Monday.
Okay, so you still had to climb up the ladder, and this is what I love about stories of people venerable in the organization. You climbed up, not thinking. See, kids today want to make a lot of money right away, and they don't want to take those steps. But you obviously took step to get where you were.
Yep.
Tell me about that journey.
Started at $65 a week for 7 days a week. After 6 months, I finally got a day off. But the BCB was my second station.
Okay. And that was the station, obviously, was my hometown, was Bristol. And so my mother used to listen to WBCB every morning. And so from there, you get to WIP to do updates and such. How did that happen?
No, well, it wasn't from there, because from there, I finally got to WWDB, which was an FM station, Friday with Frank, and I did news. I basically did news. And I went to the program director, and I said to him, and then it turned into a talk station, actually, with Irv Homer and people like that. So I went to the
Frank Ford.
Yeah, I went to the program director, and I said, "How about if I come in and do sports every morning?" Now my shift was noon to 8. He said, "This is not a sports station. This is a music, and this is a talk station. This is not a sports station." And I said to them, "Well, how about if I come in and do sports, 5 minutes of sports at 6, 7, and 8, and 9 for free?" And he said, "Sports might work." So I come in and do the sports at 6:05, 7:05, 8:05, 9:05. I lived at Summit Park East up in Roxborough, where they had tennis courts. I'd race home, and I'd give tennis lessons from 10 to 12, 7:50 a half hour. And then I'd race back and do news from noon till 8.
That is an amazing journey. So it's an example of perseverance. And then the sky kind of breaks for you now. So go ahead, continue the journey.
Remember Al Schreier, who was the sports information director at Temple? I'm sure you.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And so he called me one day, and he said, "WIP is looking for somebody to do a month's summer replacement for Charlie Swift, who was the sports director and the voice of the Eagles." He said, "Call Dean Tyler." And he gave me the number, and he arranged for an audition. And I mean, they were auditioning everybody, because Charlie took from mid-June to mid-July, a month's vacation, and they needed somebody for a month to fill in. And IP was the place to be. And they must have interviewed 90 people and auditioned them. And I never heard And then I heard in March to come back and do another audition, and I didn't hear again. And then in June, I get called in, and Charlie sees me in the lobby and says, "Come here, kid. Next Monday, when I'm gone, here's where you'll be doing the sports." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, they didn't tell you you got the job." So now I go back to DB, and I'm about to give up my full-time job for 1 month on WIP, and they tell me I don't have to, that I can still come in and do the news in the afternoon. So I go to WIP my first morning, 6:05. I am scared to death. I mean, here I am going on WIP, and the big disc jockey at WIP was Ken Garland. He owned the city. He had the highest ratings. I had never met him, but I grew up listening to him, and I knew he's in a studio down the hall. So I do 5 minutes of sports, and then I read the card that says, "It's 6:10, time for the start of the Ken Garland Show," and I cut my mic, and I don't hear anything. I think I turned the station off the air. Finally, it was probably 3 seconds, but it seemed like ever. I hear a faint click, and Ken Garland comes on the air, and the first thing he said was, "Wow, if I were Charlie Swift, I would hurry home from vacation." And before I left the building, Mike, they signed me to do the pre and post game shows and the Ed Kyatt show.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. So then, how did you finally become part of the broadcasting team? Because it's very like back then it wasn't unusual. Today it's very unusual not to have an athlete as a color analyst. You're paired up with Charlie Swift to do the Eagles broadcast. How did that work out? Were there any rough spots during that whole time? Explain what went on then.
Okay, I'll tell you, this is an amazing story. So I do the Ed Kyatt show, and then of course the following year he's fired, and but we kept in touch. So I did the pre and post game show for 4 years, and before the next to the last game of the season, I get a phone call on Saturday, and it's the Lions that the Eagles are playing, and Eddie Kyatt calls me and says, "Why don't you come over to the Marriott and have dinner with me?" So I said, "Great." So I met him at the Marriott, and we had dinner, and he's telling me all these things about the Lions. And we're talking about this, and talking about what he goes through, telling me about the quarterback. And I say, "This is great, except all I do is give scores and say, here's the NFL schedule." So I go home, I wake up on Sunday morning, and Dean Tyler calls me and tells me that Al Pollard has some kind of a stomach virus and he can't leave the house. Go to the stadium, you're doing color. So I sit there and I do the color with Charlie on that afternoon. I mean, Dean comes to me before the game. He doesn't know. He just knows I read scores. He said, are you okay? Are you prepared for this? So I turned to Dean and I said, "Yeah, let me just get this right. It's 3 for a field goal." He goes, "Oh, my goodness." So I go on. And honestly, I did a great job because I know more about the Lions than I know about the Eagles. So we do the game, and it comes out really well. Next year, I come back, and Al Pollard is back doing the color. At the end of that year, he retires. He's done. He's had enough travel. He retires, and after a search of sorts, they decide to give it to me based on that one live audition.
Wow. That's a great story. Al Pollard was a former player, though, right?
Former player.
Yeah, he was former player. Yeah, I recall. All right, so
Yeah.
so now you're in there with Charlie Swift, and Charlie's a very well known guy. Any intimidation factor there? How was he to work with?
He was great. He was great. I mean, we didn't have any kind of deep friendship or social buddies, but we got along very, very well. He tell me things. He first broadcast, he comes on and he says to me before we go on, he says, "Listen, kid." He always called me kid. He said, "Listen, kid." He said, "In the course of a Sunday afternoon, we say thousands of things. Some of them are going to be wrong, so don't worry about it." So we did the games together, and we got along fine. There was never a tense moment. We did the games. I knew I didn't overtalk. I said something only when I really had something to say. Other than that, I just sat back and did what I had to do.
Of course, most people back then know the tragic story of Charlie Swift, who commits suicide. Did you notice anything that would have led you to believe that could happen?
No, no. He was very level, never got too high, never got too low. Very same guy every week. Get off the plane from Dallas. He said, "I'll see you next Sunday, kid." And I said, "Take care, Charlie." And the next thing I know, Tuesday morning, and I'm still doing DB, by the way, full time. I get a call, and it's a friend of his at 2:00 in the morning to tell me that he had taken his life. I go into WWDB, and I do. By then, I was part of a morning show, and I do the sports. And at 9:00, when the switchboard opens, don't forget we didn't have cell phones then. The switchboard opens, the phone rings. It's Dean Tyler, who's the program director. He said, "You're doing the play-by-play Sunday. Go get a color man." And so I did. And the color man that I got, the analyst that I got, was somebody who I had befriended because WWDB was part of the same building and the same station co-owned with WHAT, which was a rhythm and blues station. And a lot of the great athletes in the city, Richie Allen, Herb Adderley, used to stop in to see Sonny Hobson, the Mighty Burner, who was in the next studio doing the rock show. And so I got to know them. So I called Herb Adderley and I said, "Herb, would you join me in the booth on Sunday?" And he said, "Sure." So I had Herb Adderley with me for the last two games of that 77 season. And of course, I didn't have the job full time. I didn't have the job, but I had Herb with me for that 77 season and those two games. And the season ended. And then by the next season, after I did get the job, Herb was a member of Wayne Harden's Temple staff, so he couldn't do it.
All right, so that's a pretty good get to get Herb Adderley. So then so who came in then? Who came in next?
Well, first of all, I didn't have the job. I mean, I just did the last two games. And then there were tapes from all over, as you might imagine. And I would have that, but I would have all these dreams. I would dream that they called me and told me I had the job. And I'd wake up the next morning depressed that it was only a dream. Or I would dream that they told me they decided to go in another direction and wake up relieved that I hadn't lost it yet. And finally, I got the call that in March that I was it, and I would be the sports director of WIP and play-by-play voice of the Eagles. And I one phone call and I quadrupled my salary. So it was a big deal. And at that point, they wanted me to help them find a color analyst. And there were three people who were auditioning for the color job. And one was Mike Evans, a former Eagles center. The other was Don Tollefson. And the third was Jim Barniak. And we went out to Temple Stadium to a cherry and white game, and I would do the play-by-play, and they would do the color. And Jim was by far the best.
Yeah, I grew up reading Jim as a columnist, and I was fascinated by him. I actually got to be friends with his brothers and that whole Barniak family, because they were from Levittown. Okay, so most people recollect your great years with Stan Walters and now with Mike Quick. So what? And Stan didn't have a filter, which was fantastic to listen to. How did that dynamic develop, and what do you remember about those days with Stan?
Stan was great. Stan was a lot of fun. You said he didn't have a filter, and we're doing a game against the Cowboys, and there were some dubious calls early. And Stan says on the air, he says, Tex Schramm, who was the Cowboys, the Cowboys general manager and ran the Cowboys and was also on the NFL competition committee. Stan yells, he says, Tex Schramm has those officials in his pocket. That's what he says. And we're doing the game. And for all of a sudden, there's a knock on the window because the writers are in the booth next to us. and they told Tex Schramm, and Tex Schramm starts knocking on the window and pulls out of his empty pockets. And then was supposed to be Stan's halftime guest and refused to go on and took Stan off the Cowboys mailing list.
Well, when he said that, what did you cringe when he said it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was Stan. You never knew what Stan was, but Stan was great. He was funny. He would come up with things like he said, well, "We're doing an Eagles game," and he's talking about some obscure coach. He said, "This reminds me of Jules Yakupovich's radar defense from Lackawanna, New York." I mean, he'd come up with these incredible things at the time. So he was a riot.
Yeah, he was very entertaining to listen to. It reminds me, like old school broadcasters sometimes don't have a filter. I worked with Steve Fredericks for many years on talk radio, my first partner. And I remember the Flyers at the time had the Legion of Boom. Mm-hmm. And so they were struggling and they weren't hitting anybody. So Steve, we have Eric Lindros on the air. Steve says to him on the air, Eric, what's your reaction when I call you guys the Legion of Sissies? Oh my God.
Oh,
what? I couldn't believe that he did it. And I had to worm my way out of that whole thing, but that's really interesting. So let me ask you this, Merrill. Did you develop, when you got to be a play-by-play guy, did you have a style in mind, or did you say, you know what, I'm just going to do it naturally and whatever comes out, comes out? Because there are a lot of signature calls that you have that people recollect, like it's good and all those kind of things. How did this come about?
Actually, I didn't have a style that I thought about, or I was just me. But now I had done Temple football, and when I was a DB, I convinced them to do Penn football. So I did several seasons of Penn football. So I wasn't just trying to do play-by-play for the first time or make it up. So I was basically just me. The voice is the same. That's never changed. But the one thing that has changed is I was a lot more selective in what I would say in those early years. I didn't want to aggravate anybody. I was honest to a point, but I wasn't critical. But as you go on and you establish your credibility, I was more and more honest to the point where I could say against the Giants in the last game of last season going into the playoffs, I could say right now the Eagles are not a good football team. I could say things like that. Don't get me wrong. I would never call for anybody's job. I would never pick on the front office or anything. I have my governor, but at the same time, I was honest. I have too much respect for these fans not to be totally honest with them. But I do it in a way that's not reckless.
Yeah, I'm glad you let it, because that's going to be my next question. You aren't afraid to be critical like a fan would be critical. Like you'll say something like, this is an abomination or something like that. And I wonder if, because, listen, the media right now is run by the teams. And if they don't like something they hear, they get on you. So how have you dealt with that at all?
Never. Believe it or not, this will be my 48th season. I've never heard the Eagles come back and criticize me for saying something or being critical. Never. The funniest story was the Super Bowl that they won, Super Bowl 52. Now they're down near the 1 yard line. They're at the 1 yard line with a second to play in the first half. And I'm saying, I'm sitting up there saying, they've got to take the 3 points. My frame of reference tells me you've got to take the 3 points. You can't take the chance and get shut down there. The whole momentum will change. That happened in an Eagles-Green Bay playoff game when the Packers went for it on goal to go 4th and 1 and to end the half, and the Eagles stacked them up. That game changed. And plus, the Patriots were getting the kickoff to begin the second half. So I said they've got to take the 3 points. And, of course, Nick Foles goes into motion. Corey Clement comes in. It's Trey Burton throws to Nick Foles. Greatest play in Eagles history. And Mike Quick comes back and says, that's why you're up here and Doug's down there. And after the game, I saw Doug, And I said, that was the worst play call with the best result I've ever seen. And, and he
Well,
was.
well, Merrill, it's all
I,
about analytics now.
and I,
Analytics, it's in a way of old school thinking. So, yeah, all right. So let me, do you remember the great calls you made? Like after a game, you go, boy, that was really good on that call. Like there have been very few moments that stand out, but obviously the Super Bowl win being one of them, and then the losing to the Patriots, another bitter moment. But like, go through these things that stand out to you as a broadcaster.
it's funny, Mike. I come home after 20 games, and out of 20 games, maybe 3 times I say, boy, I really was on today. But maybe 17 times why did I say that? Oh, I was too late picking that up. I should have never, and I missed that receipt. I'm more critical than I am self-congratulatory. And when you talk about calls, um, my favorite moment obviously was the end of Super Bowl 52, and I was scared to death because the newer the stadium, the worse they give radio seats, and we're in the opposite end zone from where that play is going to develop. And all I want to do is, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to be the announcer who blows the end of the Super Bowl. And during the week, Paul Domowitch had interviewed me, and he said, if the Eagles win, are you going to have something prepared to say? And I said, no. I said, and some announcers do write out 3 or 4 lines for those eventualities, those possibilities. And I said, no, I just want to let it come from my heart. And it happened. And many times Angelo Cataldi would have me on the morning show, and he'd say to me, I want them to win it for you because you've been doing it for so many years. And I said, no. I said, these fans sit out there in all kinds of weather. They spend all kinds of money. They take their last dollar and buy their kids jerseys. It's for the fans. So when it actually happened, number one, when Brady let go of the ball, and it's 110 yards away from where I'm sitting in the end zone, I don't know why, but the whole place slowed down. And I see it in slow motion, and I saw every inch of it, and I saw it hit the ground. And I looked up at the clock with the zeros, and I said, it's incomplete. The game is over. The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. And then what came out of my mouth was, Eagles fans everywhere, this is for you. Let the celebration begin. And if
Yeah,
they're not planned, it's just how I felt.
Yeah, well, and they're the best calls. The best are natural calls. So, of all the players, so we're talking to Merrill Reese, of course, who has been chosen to receive the 2024 Pete Rozelle Radio-Television Award in Canton, Ohio. He'll be in the Hall of Fame. It's like we have Jason Stark in the Baseball Hall of Fame. We have you in the Football Hall of Fame. It's fantastic. Give me a short list of the players that played for the Eagles that you are most excited to describe.
It's tough because there is no short list. I mean, I love Harold when he used to go over everybody and catch touchdowns. Mike Quick, electric wide receiver. Deshaun Jackson. I can tell you the single most exciting player would be Randall Cunningham, because not the best, but the single most exciting because you never knew what was going to happen. And I have a feeling he never knew what was going to happen. And the best player, if I were to say the best player in my tenure, would be Reggie White, who I think is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the best defensive end who ever lived. Reggie would be the best. And then the list goes on. I mean, who could be more? Other than the Super Bowl, my favorite moment was December 19th, 2010, when Deshaun Jackson took down the punt at the Meadowlands and with that incredible comeback. That was the moment.
Oh, you also had the Westbrook punt return as well, kind of in the same vein there.
Phenomenal. But
Yeah.
the Westbrook, as great as it was, that whole game with the Deshaun. I mean, the Eagles were down, I think, 23-3 at halftime. I said on the air, the score is the Giants 23. The Eagles are still at the hotel. That's how bad that was. And then
And that's the thing. That's the thing that endears you to fans because they're thinking the same thing. And you plug right into what they're thinking. All right, so let's go, because I know that you treat a game day almost as seriously your preparation as a player. And I read a story many years ago about how you lounge in a bathtub and practice your invocation. Is that true? And do you still do that?
Well, number one, I don't. It was true. I've graduated to a shower. but
I thought the bathtub was so you can relax and just think and just resonate and the whole thing.
It's Billie Jean King. When I did the Freedoms on television, she used to tell me that when she went to Wimbledon, she used to use something called psycho-cybernetics, which was a book by a guy named Dr. Maxwell Maltz, which the whole theory is that what we imagine is just as important to our frame of reference as to what actually happens. So what I do is, before I leave the hotel or before I leave for a game, I'll sit back in the quiet of my room in a chair and just sit back and envision a play and go through the numbers and do it and feel a sense of calmness, so that when I go to the stadium and the crowd is nuts and I'm getting a million signals from my producer and my spotter, that I don't, that I still feel in control of what I'm doing. So it's the art of imagining and succeeding that you've done, and I'm sure in sports before. Envision yourself making the putt or hitting a drive down the fairway. It's just a way of preparing.
I always envisioned being able to hit a slider to deep center field for a home run, but it never. The visualization never came true. So I at least had the visualization. All right, we teased a little earlier about golf. You're an avid golfer. You're an avid golf fan. So what were your impressions of that U.S. Open yesterday with DeChambeau and Rory down the stretch?
Rory's my favorite golfer. He really is. And it broke my heart when he missed those two putts. I just can't imagine what he feels like right now. I wanted Rory so badly. He hasn't won a major since 2014. And DeChambeau's come a long way, and he's great. But I'm a Rory fan.
Yeah, so and he's getting criticized for walking out, but I don't blame him. I got to be honest with you. I don't blame him. I wouldn't feel like talking either after that. Merrill, listen, continue to do this for forever.
I won't.
You're young at heart. You're still spry. I mean, the people can see this interview, and you have not lost a beat. So best of luck, my friend, and congratulations for being in the Hall of Fame. It's a wonderful achievement for you and your family.
Thanks, Mike. It's always fun speaking with you. Lots of luck.
The great Merrill Reese. Thanks, Merrill. Bye-bye. For BetRivers people and for all the people listening to the podcast, again, you can download the podcast and you can subscribe for free. Tell your friends and neighbors. We're having fun doing the podcast. You can reach me, Mike at MikeMiss.com, and also on Twitter at MikeMiss25. Everybody have a great week. We'll talk to you later in the week right here with the Mike Missanelli podcast. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.